CPAC. Hey. I think that between the four of us, we've flown something like 24,000 miles to be here with you. And it's wonderful, and you're all fantastic, and this event is so much fun, and it's been worth every single mile. So, right? Yes?
Amen. Amen.
Amen. Okay. So let's get started. America loves Israel, and American conservatives especially love Israel. That's right. And Israel loves America. And as the ACU learned when they joined me in Israel in 2017, the reasons and the expression of this relationship, the reasons for and the expression of it, go much farther than most people realize. American financial and political support and American ideas, most importantly of all, have really helped build an exceptional society in the Middle East. And today we're going to look at some of the strategic, cultural, and economic contributions that Israel makes to the world. So with that, I want to turn to our panelists. Eugene, you teach law, and you are an expert in geopolitics. Could you just give us a quick overview of the value of having a Western ally in the Middle East, like Israel?
If you look at a map of the world, from all the way in Northwest Africa, Morocco, all the way as far as Iran and beyond, there is an unbroken line of authoritarian governments, dictatorships, and countries deeply hostile to American values. In that long line of countries that spans a third of the globe, there's one little dot that breaks it up. And having that dot be there, as opposed to having it not be there, makes a vital strategic difference to the United States. It's a question of whether there's an unbroken, continuous plane of hostile countries, hostile monarchies, Islamist states, or whether there's a little island, a beacon in the middle. And what's amazing about Israel is regardless of the state of geopolitics, those chain of countries have had difficult relationships with America. During the Cold War, many of them, Syria, Egypt, Algeria, were Soviet allies. So Israel was a vital player in the Cold War, the one island of pro-American Western democracy against the Soviet bloc. And indeed, Soviet troops, in a little-known fact, were actually deployed against Israel in both the Six-Day War and the Yom Kippur War in 1973. But then the Soviet Union collapsed, so you think, who needs Israel anymore? We're after the Cold War. And before you know it, an entire new wave of hostile ideologies sweeps the Middle East, and where Soviet communism had previously been ascendant, it's replaced with a new ideology, in many ways more dangerous, radical Islamism. And as that's sweeping the Middle East, there's again only one country that breaks the flow, that breaks the continuity of Islamicism. And I think what drives home the importance of Israel most concretely is the current war in Syria and the current attempt of Iran to become a power and take over the Middle East. So many countries have participated in bombing campaigns against ISIS, and ISIS was ultimately defeated. ISIS was an extremely dangerous anti-Western element. We were right to oppose it. Israel is the only country, other than the United States, to fight both ISIS on one hand and Iran on the other hand. Israel is the only country to have said, there's no good here between ISIS and the Syrians and the Iranians. Other than the United States, Israel is the only country to bomb both, and that's a major contribution to global peace and security.
It is. Yoram, building on Eugene's point, maybe we can concretize some of that with some examples unique to America. You've worked a lot with the American Congress. America sends Israel an aid package every year that's quite substantial and important. What does America get back in terms of saved lives or saved money? If you could give us a couple of examples, that would be great.
Well, first and foremost, Israel is immensely grateful to the U.S. for providing the vast majority of defense technologies and defense equipment which is required by Israel to survive in the Middle East. However, contrary to conventional wisdom, the U.S. does not extend foreign aid to Israel. In fact, in reality, the U.S. makes an annual investment in Israel, and the question is, what is the extent of the rate of return. And I'm going to share with you the facts about the rate of return of a few 100% annually in real tangible terms, in dollar terms. For instance, Israel received from the US, is receiving from the US, the F-16 combat airplane manufactured by Lockheed Martin in Fort Worth, Texas, for which, again, we are very grateful. However, on a daily basis, we have shared lessons learned by the Israeli Air Force with the manufacturer. We have become the most unique battle-tested laboratory for Lockheed Martin and for the entire US defense industry. Those lessons have been transformed into well over 600 modifications in the current generation of the F-16. Upon visiting the plant, I asked the plant manager if he could quantify it in terms of dollars. The response was ballpark, mega billion-dollar bonanza to the manufacturer. We save years of research and development. We promote the competitiveness of American products throughout the world, and that basically means more export and wider base of employment. We are talking about the late General Alexander Haig, who was Commander-in-Chief, Supreme Commander of NATO forces, later on Secretary of State, and his reference to Israel was that Israel is the largest American aircraft carrier, which doesn't require a single American on board, deployed in the most critical area for America's national security, and cannot be sunk. He concluded his reference to Israel by saying, if there were not a Jewish state in the western flank of the Middle East, then the US would have to deploy few more real aircraft carriers to the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea and the Mediterranean to deploy more ground forces, all of which would have cost the American taxpayer something between $15 and $20 billion every single year, all of which is saved by one Jewish state. To sum up this very tiny synopsis of the huge inventory of benefits to America from its ally in the Middle East, Israel, I would say that when it comes to fourth down and 10 yards to go, with 6 minutes on the clock and 5 points behind, the American quarterback can trust the Israeli wide receiver to catch the ball and score the winning touchdown.
Eli, Yoram just mentioned some of the massive economic benefits that we get from the military cooperation and assistance. I'm wondering if I could turn to you to discuss some of the kind of better known economic miracle of Startup Nation. Israel is a high-tech wonder, an agricultural wonder. It's founded in a place with very few resources. It went from having no state 70 years ago to just having the first ever privately funded space launch a few weeks ago. That's worth it, yeah. And I was hoping you could talk about some of Israeli innovations, whether in agriculture or humanitarian aid or elsewhere, that really help the world. And then beyond that, you do something very specific and unique with economic development in Judea and Samaria. So I was hoping you could share that with the crowd.
My pleasure. First question is, what is Judea and Samaria? Judea and Samaria, often mischaracterized as the West Bank, is a region that Israel liberated from Jordanian rule in 1967, terminated the racist policy of forbidding Israelis and Jews to live in that region. Subsequent to that auspicious start, to that auspicious history, Israelis have built a model of economic coexistence in the region where Israelis and Palestinians are able to work together. And in fact, just last week, we launched a brand new initiative, the initiative of my good friend Avi Zimmerman, an Israeli Jew, together with Ashraf Jabari, an Arab Muslim, to create the first ever Judea and Samaria Chamber of Commerce. that will be allowing. It allows us to look at the region as a beacon of coexistence, how we can work together, live together, and I think that's something that's extremely important. And again, not here trying to suggest that economics alone is going to resolve the entire conflict, or to put in more contemporary terms for Representative Ilhan Omar to understand, it's not all about the Benjamins. However, economic coexistence is critically important in creating a climate where future trust, we can build a culture that we're living together, and therefore I believe that this Chamber of Commerce itself is probably one of the most important chambers of commerce in the entire world. But as you said, there's a lot more than Judea and Samaria. Israel is often referred to as a startup nation. And you look at a country as small as Israel, yet from a humanitarian perspective, we're all over the place. Israel has sent humanitarian aid to Houston, where my sister lives, when we had the flood, where Houston had the flood a couple years ago. Just now sent aid all the way to Brazil when they had a major bridge collapse. And it's not just that, Israel's even sent aid to Iran. You heard that right. Israel sent aid when Iran was hit by an earthquake, because the fact that the mullahs are horrifically anti-Semitic doesn't prevent Israel's humanitarian instinct to jump into place and say we need to help the Iranians, who frankly probably are friends of Israel. The leaders are not. I think that's a very important point. It's a very important point. That is how Israel is seen in the world. On top of that, we have mentioned other kinds of high tech. Just this week, I saw Israel, there was an announcement of the top 50 fastest growing high tech companies. 6 of them were based in Israel. But it's not just that. You think about something even more substantial. In Israel, even the liberals don't believe in global warming. Because in Israel is the only country in the world where the desert is growing smaller. Through phenomenal ag tech and free market, water technologies, the desert is actually blooming. And I have to say that is, frankly, a phenomenal metaphor, the desert blooming, for all of the growth we're seeing in Israel, which is growing at such a preposterous rate that it would almost be biblical, which I guess you could say is appropriate for the Holy Land.
That actually provides an excellent transition to the next question of some of the shared cultural foundations between America and Israel. I think that they contribute a tremendous amount to what Israel gives the world. The theme of this CPAC is what makes America great, and I will suggest, and I'd love the panel to react, that what makes America great, what makes Israel great, are some of the values that we share and embody. As our good friend Jeff Balaban says, exceptionalism is common to both of these societies. So Yoram, you are the only person born in Israel on this stage. You are also the only person who wears cowboy boots all the time.
Justin boots, and I have Tony Lama at home.
Yes, see that? 40 years, he told me, something like that. It was the first pair. 66, משהו כזה. So you might be one of the best Israeli representatives to speak about the identification of American and Israeli culture and identity. So maybe you could take us back to some of the shared historical and cultural foundations.
Maybe a brief reference to what we just heard from Eli. In Israel, there are 250 of the American high-tech giants who operate in Israel research and development centers in an attempt to leverage the brain power of Israel. Recently, at a board meeting of Intel in the Silicon Valley, the CEO stated that if not for Intel's research and development centers in Israel, Intel would have been decimated by the global competition. Going back to the roots of the very special attitude by Americans towards the Jewish state, it precedes the establishment of Israel. In fact, it precedes the arrival of the first Jewish pilgrim to the U.S., started with the 1620 arrival docking of the Mayflower and then the Arabella, the passengers on those boats left, according to their own documentation, modern-day Egypt, Britain. They went through the modern-day parting of the sea, the Atlantic, and the destination was the modern-day Promised Land. In order to illustrate that, I come, like the rest of us, from Jerusalem, Israel. We have one Jerusalem, but in the US there are 18 Jerusalems, going back to the early pilgrims. In the US there are 32 Salems. Salem is the original biblical name of Jerusalem, and those are only two examples of multitude of towns and sites bearing biblical names, which suggest the 400-year-old roots of US-Israel relation. In 2019, those of you who were before or will be on Capitol Hill here or there in Washington, you would see the chamber of the House, the bust of the head of Moses staring at the speaker. There are 22 other busts, but Moses is in the center confronting the speaker. The rest stare at Moses. And when I asked the curator, first time I saw that, why is that bust different than all other busts? The response by the curator was, Moses is the source of human law, and therefore the other lawgivers stare at Moses, but Moses at the speaker. If you cross a small street and you go up the stairs to the US Supreme Court, you will see at the main chamber, above the 9 Supreme Court justices at the ceiling, Moses holding the 10 commandments. That's one of 7 or 8 engravements and statues of Moses in the US Supreme Court. And last and not least, if you visit Austin, Texas, on the ground of the state capitol, there is a monument of the tablets with the 10 commandments, as is one in Oklahoma City and another one in Little Rock, Arkansas. All that highlights the deep spiritual and national security synergy between the leader of the free world and the junior partner named Israel.
Eugene, maybe you could take us a little more into the modern day and explain what Americans might find unique and desirable and appreciate about Israeli culture.
So we've talked already about the security, military, economic importance of Israel. But today, perhaps one of the greatest challenges for America is not economic, is not military. It's cultural, it's spiritual. It's about the content of our culture. And at a time when traditional Western culture is under extraordinary attack on campuses, in media, Israel is a model of something that seems to be working. Looking at a few really basic indicators of how is a culture flourishing, is a people flourishing, we see that something special is going on in Israel. So Israel, even though it's not one of the richest countries in the world, it is always ranked as one of the top 10 countries in life expectancy. Israeli life expectancy continues to rise, and it is on par with some of the wealthiest countries in the world. Something for America to notice. In America, for the past 3 years, for the first time since World War I, life expectancy has gone down for 3 continuous years, not due to medical setbacks in technology, due to some kind of malaise, due to the opioid crisis, increase in suicide. Israelis, on the other hand, we see, have a vast optimism. In all surveys of people, asking them, are they happy? Do they think the future is going to be a better place for their kids? Israelis are some of the most optimistic people on earth. They report the greatest belief that the future is going to bring something better. At the same time, Israelis are also Israel is the most fertile nation in the West. Israeli women have 2.8 children on average, which is almost double other Western countries, other European countries. There's nothing like it, and the rate is actually stable or growing. Again, it's not clear whether Israelis have children because they're optimistic or they're optimistic because they have children, but there's something that's pointing to a deep cultural success. And I think one of the main ingredients of that success is nationalism is not a dirty word in Israel. Israelis have a sense of national purpose. And Israel is a secular country in the sense that it's run in a secular system. There is no rabbinic official authority in politics. Politicians are predominantly secular, but there's a deep respect for religion and the role of religion in people's lives, and the most secular politicians show that respect. And there's a sense of community, a sense of national purpose, a sense of religio-historic purpose. And we see, as Yoram described, that doesn't make Israel a backwards country. It's one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world, but it gives people a sense of meaning that makes Israel a model for cultural forces. And at a time when ideas of tradition, of nationalism, are ideas that are under attack in our culture, we can look to Israel as a model that these values are not only inconsistent with being forward-looking and cosmopolitan, but make you live longer and make you happier too.
Ellie, you take international delegations around Judea and Samaria all the time. Maybe give us a picture of what they connect with and what really seems to move them when they see Israel.
You know, I host, as Elena said, I host a lot of international delegations. The one that sticks out the most is a delegation I took of Indian chiefs who came to Israel to see who is indigenous in the region. And we're driving through the area, and they asked me, what grows in this area? So there really isn't that much. There really isn't that much, but there's lots of grapevines, lots of olive groves, grapes and olives. So he goes, Ellie, is wine, olive oil, are they consequential in your culture? So I said, yeah. They just had the holiday of Hanukkah. The menorah, the symbol of the state of Israel, is a candelabra, an oil that's supposed to be lit with olive oil. Every Jewish holiday, the meals always begin with a blessing over the wine. There's a hierarchy. Of course, Jews, we have hierarchies of everything. We have hierarchies of blessings. The blessing over wine is the most consequential. It's the holiest. It's the most special. The chief says to me, well, that's not surprising, because any indigenous people build their culture about what grows in the environment. And then he says, had never occurred to me. Then he says something else, which also hadn't occurred to me, but should be pretty obvious. He says, the Muslims who live in the region, they don't drink alcohol, they don't drink wine. They said, you will not find another indigenous peoples in the world who would take 50% of what grows in the region and say, that's out of bounds. So to sum up, when people come on a tour to Judea and Samaria, they realize men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and Jews are from Judea.
All right, we have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask that we keep our answers to about a minute. And this is the last question round. So Americans overwhelmingly support Israel, certainly more than any other country in the entire world. But anti-Israel voices have risen on American campuses and certainly in progressive politics. And I'm wondering how you see what we do to keep this relationship strong, because, and feel free to elaborate on it, but I really believe that the strength of this relationship is part of American exceptionalism and part of what makes Israel great as well. So, Yoram.
Well, I've always believed that education is the solution for either ignorance or misbehavior. And it seems to me that it's incumbent upon those of us who understand the deep 400-year-old roots between our two countries, and those of us who understand the benefits to both countries, to keep educating other people about that very rare synergy. I gave few examples, but one which is very topical these days, maybe unfortunately, American troops go to Afghanistan and Iraq. Some of them go through Israel, And the reason they go through Israel is because they spend 2-3 weeks in Israel trained by the top experts on identifying improvised explosive devices, the IEDs, on facing suicide bombers, and on facing car bombs. And that has been responsible for very great reduction of American fatalities. Going back to the first Gulf War, at the end of the war, back in 1991, I was in Washington and I heard then Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney giving a speech about the war. The first sentence was, "Thank you, Israel, for eradicating the Iraqi nuclear reactor in 1981, which spared us, the US, a nuclear confrontation in 1991. How does one measure such a unique contribution in terms of American lives or mega billion dollars? The bottom line is that we should pay attention to the very, very special ties between the two countries, which are not a one-way street, but rather mutually beneficial two-way street, which highlight the rare synergy between the leader of the world and, again, the junior partner. It's very critical for Israel's survival, but at the same time renders mega billion-dollar benefit to America, both militarily as well as financially.
Okay. Eugene, 1 minute, closing thought.
So it's important to understand, and I think it's clear from what we've all said, that the importance of Israel to America is not a conservative issue. Israel is not important just to American conservatives, it's important to Americans, and support of Israel needs to be understood not as something conservatives like, but as something all Americans like. At the same time, and the bipartisan nature of that support is crucial. At the same time, it takes two to be bipartisan. And what I think we're going to increasingly hear in Congress is calls on Republicans to support Israel less, to support it more like Democrats, to have bipartisanship, to get everybody on the same page. We want everyone to be on the same page. It's important to be on the same page, but it's important to be on the right page. And bipartisanship is crucial, but it's important to remember that the relationship with Israel isn't a Democrat or Republican relationship, it's an American relationship, and one should never be afraid to pursue those policies strongly.
All right, Eli, 1 minute closing thought.
I will just actually restate and reiterate what Eugene just said, because I think that really is the key point. There is a knee-jerk reaction to try to water down pro-Israel support for Israel in order to pacify those on the left who are having a much more difficult time with it. I think there needs to be a recognition that, frankly, we should be following what President Trump has done. The Trump administration, Vice President Pence, who spoke here a few minutes ago, moving the embassy to Jerusalem was such a critical thing, because what it showed was that we're no longer going to be lying and trying to lead people on that Jerusalem is up for debate. Jerusalem has always been and will always be the eternal capital of the Jewish people. And when this administration went ahead and moved that embassy, it made a very important statement that we're not watering things down, and there needs to be a recognition that if there is an attempt to try to water down support for Israel, it's not protecting Israel, it's damaging the relationship with Israel, and we need to make sure that doesn't happen.
Fantastic. I want to thank you all and the ACU especially for letting us have this discussion on the stage. Thank our panelists. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.